So we're now recording, and then let me admit all. Right, here we go. Morning, Alan. Morning, Billy. Morning, Derek. Morning, Gareth. Morning, Judith. If you've just joined, if you could please mute, please, to cut out any background noise. Thanks for joining, Judith. Morning, Jane. Morning, Marcus. Morning, Richard. If you could mute, please, that would be great. Let's admit all. Morning, Aaron. Morning, Bryn. And if you have just joined, if you could mute, please, that would be fantastic. Thank you. Morning, Steph. Morning, David. Thank you for joining. Let's just bring a few more in. Morning, Brian. Brian, if you could mute, that will be good. Thank you. And Bryn, if you could mute as well, or do you want me to do it for you? I don't mind. Morning, Padraig. Let's have a look. Yeah, no, Bryn. I'll mute Bryn. There we go. Okay, brilliant. Morning, Alan. Let's go there as well. Excellent. Okay, that looks like we're there. Brilliant. Okay, excellent. Thanks everybody for joining this morning. Welcome to this week's Pension Playpen Coffee Morning. We are delighted to have Chris Curry on today from MAPS to present an update on Pension Dashboard, which has been bubbling along, as we know, for some time. I think this is Chris's second appearance with his MAPS head on, and hopefully you'll be able to get some useful information and updates on Chris, ably assisted by Duncan Stevens from Gretel. So it's a bit of an informal presentation, a bit of a roundtable session at the end. We do encourage, if you haven't been on Playpen before, we do encourage you to raise a hand and ask any questions you have during the session. Or actually, we'll open up the chat room and you can put comments in the chat room as well. And Henry, Tapper, or I will bring you in to ask a question or make your point. We like to be challenged. We like you to challenge presenters. Presenters like to be challenged, don't they, Chris?
They do, definitely.
So there we go. Finally, we are recording. So every thumbs up, Billy, Gareth, Ian, thumbs up, Padraig, Brian, everybody happy we're recording? Excellent. Okay. Well, I'll monitor the lobby, and Henry, you can be umpire going forward, I guess. But we'll pass over to Chris, and Chris is going to share some slides, and I'll hand over to you. So thank you, Chris, in advance for your presentation.
Okay, sorry, Steve. First thing I should have checked actually is whether I'm sharing the slides, or whether someone is sharing them on my behalf. I'd assumed that you would be driving the slides, Steve. Apologies for that.
I can do the slides if you want me to.
If you could, that would be brilliant, because multitasking isn't my speciality, I'm afraid, despite the fact I've got two different jobs.
Yeah, okay.
So if I could leave that with you, Steve.
Yeah, we can do that. Give me 20 seconds, and you do a quick introduction for people that don't know. Who are you? Who are you?
And it will be seamless. Thank you very much. So good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Curry. As Steve has already said, I'm the principal of the Pensions Dashboards Programme at the Money and Pension Service. We are the group that's responsible for providing the ecosystem for pensions dashboards in the UK. So doing everything in the central digital architecture to enable pension schemes with the data to connect with pensions dashboards with the people at the other end. We are the ultimate middlemen, I guess, in this situation, both in terms of the technology, but also in terms of the standards and the rules of engagement around how pensions dashboards are going to work in the UK. So again, as Steve also mentioned, we've been doing this for a while. We were set up in 2019, so we're now just coming up to our fifth anniversary. And I think it's fair to say, as most of you will be aware, we're slightly behind where we'd hoped to be at this point in the cycle. But we are catching up rapidly, I think, and when we go through the presentation, I'll bring you up to speed on some of the things that we've been doing as we go through. I probably don't need it too much for this audience, but just a quick reminder, I think, of why pensions dashboards are important and what pensions dashboards are. So we are looking to bring everybody, or people's information about pensions into one place online and securely, so they can look at that information to both increase their own knowledge of their pensions, but ultimately as well to increase their financial confidence and ultimately their financial security through a better understanding of their position in pensions. An important subpart of that is that there are also, according to estimates from the very august Pensions Policy Institute, somewhere in the region of 27 billion pounds worth of pension pots, which are currently lost in that the holders of those pension pots and the companies don't have up-to-date details or knowledge of the whereabouts of the owners of those pension pots. And so pensions dashboards are also likely to be a very important way in which people are reunited with their money. So with that introduction out of the way, and as Steve said, very happy to take questions as we go through. There's about 10 slides in total, so hopefully it won't take too long to go through. If we can move on to the first slide, please.
Okay,
Steve.
Can I confirm that you can see that, Chris? You can see this slide, yeah?
I can see the slide, although it's not in the presentation view, so
right, hang on. Let me go.
It might be a bit small on some people's screens.
There we go.
That's perfect.
Fine.
Thank you.
Next slide. Okay.
That's it. Thank you. So I'm sure most of you have been keeping up to date with what's been going on in the pensions dashboard space. And so this is just a brief reminder of the state of play at the moment and where we are. So currently, over the past 18 months or so, the programme has been going through a few changes, and this is the kind of subsequent place where we find ourselves. So the first date that you can see there is the connection deadline of the 31st of October 2026. Again, I'm never quite sure why they chose Halloween to be that final connection deadline day, but that's the date that we've got. And that is the date by which all of those schemes within the purview of the regulations have to connect to the ecosystem. So the 31st of October 2026 is the drop dead deadline. It's slightly disconcerting when I can see myself on the screen.
Sorry, Chris, there's a lot of background
okay.
noise. Somebody is not muted and there's a lot of background noise. So hang on, let me just see who that is. Okay, I think that's okay now.
Looks like they're all done. Perfect. Thank you.
So let me do that. Can you see that now?
That's great. Thanks, Steve. So yes, 31st of October is the date by which everybody needs to have connected, which is in effect every pension scheme in the UK with 100 or more relevant members going forward. But we're not obviously expecting all of the schemes to wait until the 31st of October 2026 to connect, even though that is the legal requirement. So what has been put in place alongside the regulatory deadline is some very recently released guidance. So this came out just before Easter, and this kind of works with the regulation and sets out when schemes are expected to be connecting to the ecosystem. So I'll say a little bit more about that on the next slide, but just to bear in mind that although the regulatory date is the 31st of October, schemes will be expecting to be connecting much in advance of that, and according to the timeline that was released, as the slide says, on the 25th of March, that will be starting from April next year and be completing before October 2026. So I'll say a little bit more about that when we get on to that. Of course, with the publication of the guidance, it doesn't mean that work on the programme stops. There's still an awful lot of work to be doing. So the programme is working very hard with both our delivery partners. So we work very closely within government, with the Department for Work and Pensions, but also with the pensions regulator and with the FCA, and also some subsidiaries of other government departments like the Government Digital Service, to make sure that what we're providing is up to the best standards. And so we continue to work with those, and of course the industry as well, over the coming months, to make sure that everybody is ready to connect for guidance when the guidance comes into force from April next year. I think we are very pleased that although we said that everyone would get a minimum of 12 months notice ahead of the first connection window, we've actually been able to publish that guidance so people have more than the promised 12 months to get ready. So we're not expecting there to be too many problems between now and the first connection window in April 2025. We know that the industry have been continuing to do work in the background for the past 12 months since we announced the initial delay to the programme, and we know that there's been a lot of progress, in particular in the last couple of months, and a lot of programmes now getting back up to speed in order to make sure that they can meet that guidance deadline as well as the ultimate regulatory deadline. Also, on top of the connection deadline, something I'll come on to a little bit later, we're also interested in the evolving dashboard market. Very pleased to see Richard on here with the latest setup of the Pensions Dashboards Operators Coalition. I think I've got that right. Rich will correct me if I've got that wrong, but it's important that also that there are dashboards available for people to use as and when we decide that the ecosystem and the providers are ready for dashboards to be used. And I'll say a little bit more about when that's likely to be later on as well, what we call the pensions dashboards available points and when that's likely to be. So that's a brief overview of kind of where we are in terms of the deadline and the guidance. If I can move on to the next slide, Steve, I'll just say a little bit more about that guidance itself. As I said, this was published just before Easter, so I hope everybody had a chance to look at it over the Easter break. And so what this covers is the timings of when we would like and expect different tranches of pension schemes to be connecting into the ecosystem. I should stay here, and again, I'll cover a little bit more later on. We're working very closely with just over 20 voluntary participants who are building connections into the ecosystem, who will be connecting well in advance of the guidance coming into operation. But this is for all of those schemes who either are not part of our voluntary participant group and are building a connection. And if there are schemes that people know of who are building a connection and aren't part of the voluntary participant group, we at PDP would be very happy to talk to them to help them make the best use of the resources that we have available to help them with that connection. But also those who are going to be using a third party, such as an integrated service provider, to help with their connection process as they go forward. So as I said, it's all relevant to all schemes who are 100 relevant members or more, including those providers of stakeholders and personal pensions, as well as defined benefit schemes, master trusts, public sector pension schemes, the whole range of schemes within the remit of the regulation. And it's really split, as it was before, into two different parts. The ultimate aim of the guidance and the staging timetable is to allow those larger and better prepared schemes to connect first, and from that experience to help with the onboarding later on of those smaller schemes and those that may have more work to do between now and the time that they connect, and that includes for example, defined benefit schemes going later than the defined contribution schemes. So there is a lot of similarity in the ordering of which the new guidance sets out the staging timetable with the initial staging timetable that was in regulations. The main difference, it's now being done over a shorter period of time. We can do that because we think we now have better information about the number of connections which we need to put in place. We think there will be a lot more of the market using a third party to connect than was initially thought when we were setting the staging timetable up the first time around, and also because we are allowing more testing time in advance of the window opening than we did previously as well. So we're sure that we'll be having a lot more of a stable connection process and understand it a lot more than may have been the case previously when we were going forward. So the largest schemes, those with 1,000 or more members, generally will be in the first part of the staging timetable, which will run between April and November of next year. And then part two, which picks up a much larger number of schemes, but a much smaller number of pension scheme memberships, will start from 31st of January 2026 and run till the end of September. That ordering is really important because not only does it mean that those schemes that are better prepared will be connecting first, it also means that we will get more pension scheme memberships covered through connections much sooner. And they include as part of that the state pension as well. The state pension is actually going to be a pathfinder and will be the first to connect into our ecosystem as we go through. And that means that there's more chance that we can make pensions dashboards available to the public sooner, because there will be more pensions that are able to be found. One of the very important elements of user testing we've done in the past suggests that if people go onto a pensions dashboard and find what they are and don't find what they expect to find, so they don't find pensions they know that they have, then that can be a very dispiriting experience, and it means that people are unlikely to come back. So coverage is a really important part. It's not the only factor that we're looking at, but it is one of them that we'll look at as we go through. So the staging timetable is really important for allowing the dashboard available point to come sooner. It's important to allow there to be a managed connection process, both for the industry and for the programme itself, and also for the regulators to be able to be on top of who's connecting and when as we go through, and hopefully to make it a relatively smooth transition as we go through. Okay, so that was all I wanted to mention on the timetable, but very happy to take any questions if there are any which have come up.
Henry, are there any in the chat? Is there any questions in the chat at all, or anybody want to raise a hand and ask a question?
We've just had Porrig come on the chat. Porrig, do you want to ask your questions personally? I know you're not shy of coming.
Happy to, H. Thank you very much, Chris. Good morning. I've got a few which should be very simple for you to address now. Firstly, have the problems that caused the delays that led to the hiatus now finally been fully resolved?
So
given
yes,
that we've had the guidance issued and we now have an end date.
Yes, that's right. So if you can recall, going back to, it was probably just over 12 months ago, probably a little bit longer, the challenges that we had were really around some of the build of the connection process. So the way in which schemes will be able to connect into the ecosystem, and also around the resources that we had available to the programme. I mean, as I mentioned in the select committee, if you are in an arm's length body of government trying to recruit in the tech market, you're at a disadvantage generally. However, what we have been doing since then is the Department for Work and Pensions has leaned in a lot to what we do. They obviously have a very large group of technical experts who work on a number of different programs, and so we've been able to utilize the resources from the wider department to bring into the program to make sure that we are fully resourced and with the capabilities that we need to be able to get over those hurdles that we found ourselves with towards the end of 2022 and into early 2023. So yes, we are confident that we have the right people in place and the right resources going forward. And I think we know that things are never going to be straightforward from here on in. There will always be challenges that come up. We feel we are now in a much better, much more resilient place to be able to deal with those challenges as we go forward. One of the other important things, as I mentioned, is we're moving into testing quite a long way in advance of that first guidance window opening. And so that should give us another opportunity to make sure that we are fully up and running by the time we get to next April.
Okay, so can I just come back on that and just ask you then, so as far as you're concerned, the project will be completed as of October 2026 to the level that you are expecting it to be in your planning as of today? You're confident that is going to happen?
Yeah, so that's definitely the plan that we're working to. Just to make
it clear,
the plan
you're working to, Chris, but I've heard it so many times before.
Yeah.
But you are confident now that is going to happen because of what's gone on in the preceding months to get you to where you are now.
Yeah. I mean, there are always issues which can happen between now and then, and also to make clear that what happens by the 31st of October 2026 is that all those schemes in scope have connected. That's what we're talking about, and that's what we will have done. The dashboard's available point is a slightly different issue, so the programme may well need to continue beyond that, or the dashboard available point might come sooner. We don't know what that is at the moment, but in terms of having everybody connected, obviously that relies on the industry connecting as well. But yes, we'll be in a position to have connected them all by the end of October 26.
Thank you.
One question from Lynette. Do you want to ask your question directly, or do you want me to ask it, Lynette?
I'm happy to, but I did say it might come up in the presentation later, so I didn't want to preempt. But so this is new to me. This is the first event I've joined. So it's my question is, because I know this is what I'll get asked, will there be, once the dashboard is available to everybody, will there be a unique identifier, i.e. something like an NI number so that you can identify all the pots? So for instance, for myself, I've got 6 different providers, 6 pots with 6 different providers. I assume once this dashboard is available, I will go in, log in, and I will see all of those pension pots. But is there going to be a unique identifier, like something like an NI number that identifies that I have these pots with these providers?
Thanks, Lynette. That's a really good question. So there won't be a single unique identifier, but there will be a digital identity service, which is part of the ecosystem that we're constructing and that we'll be utilising as part of that. The reason being is there isn't currently a unique identifier, certainly not a unique digital identifier, and the closest we have is national insurance number, but that has some issues in some circumstances it's not necessarily unique. In some circumstances people have more than one national insurance number, and in some circumstances people may not know their national insurance number, and there's currently not an easy online way to verify a national insurance number when someone enters it. So we expect that the vast majority of people will use a national insurance number, and the vast majority of matches that schemes do with individuals will use a national insurance number, but it's not foolproof and it's not universal at the moment. So what we'll also be using once the identity is verified, using the most recent and up-to-date verification tools that will be available. In doing that, is each scheme will have matching criteria, which they will use to look at a set of different characteristics, and then each scheme will choose their own basis on which they decide whether they've matched that individual with a pension or not. And that will be things like the national insurance number, first name, surname, date of birth, part of postcode, those kind of data points that it's important that all schemes therefore make sure are as up to date and as clean as possible in order to enable as many pensions as possible to be found. We think that over time the dashboard will lead to an improvement in the quality of the data, and that it will mean that matches are much more likely to be verified and found as we go through. I can see there's a couple of issues or a couple of thoughts coming through about unique identifiers. I mean, there are other potential ones. The NHS numbers has been mentioned, but unfortunately pension schemes don't have access to NHS numbers. Equally, I think personal tax references can be used, but again, they're not things which are generally shared and recorded with pension providers. The national insurance number issues really date back to it being a system which has been in use for decades, and some of which was initially paper-based, and it not being potentially as unique as it could be. I think research that we've done suggests that somewhere it's around 80 to 90% accurate, but there are a significant minority of cases where national insurance numbers don't work as well as they should do.
Lynette asked an additional question, which is one I think that's always on our mind, which is that at the DAP, are we expecting to be able to see not just our private pensions, but the state pension as well?
Yeah, again, really important. And yes, the state pension will be an integral and foundation part of pensions dashboards. As I mentioned, two key purposes: one, to find lost pensions, but secondly, to give people an idea of what they're likely to have at retirement, and the state pension is a really important part of that for many, if not most people. So as I mentioned, with our testing, the state pension team here at the Department of Work and Pensions will be the first to connect, and they will be available. State pension information will be available right from the start of pensions dashboards.
Okay, that's good. And we'll be able to see all the stuff around the state pension, which we'll be able to see through the government gateway, or yeah? Yeah,
we will. So it will be a kind of the same information that's currently replicated or produced in that format will be passported through into dashboards.
Excellent. Okay. There's a question from Billy, and then I'll come to one from Alan. Billy, yours is a question about safeguarding people against themselves taking all their money as cash. Do you want to ask it directly? Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I'm back here. I'm back now. Yeah, so I don't want to be a nuisance on this, and I'll sort of tell a little story. I asked the same question, 3 or 4 years ago, and I didn't get a good reception. Then Adrian Balding at the end, who was chairing, said, he was asked a question, will the government back it? And he said, well, as soon as the government realised that people go on the website and take all their money out and pay lots of tax, then of course they will. So I think the issue here is it's just human nature. And I said this with pension freedoms. If people can see money in front of them, then they may be tempted, to take their money out sooner than is prudent. And of course, you've got pension freedom, so it's a difficult one. But presumably, Chris, you're minded of this sort of behavioural stuff, and what are you doing to to sort of guard against that, or to help people?
Yeah, so absolutely, it's a really important point. So a couple of really key things. Firstly, dashboards themselves aren't transactional, so you won't be able to aggregate or move any money around at all on pensions. It's just purely information provision. Secondly, and this is again very topical, I know the FCA have just recently I'm not sure what the right word is, reconsulted on the regulations, the rules they're going to put in place around the provision of pensions dashboards going forward. And interestingly, for a kind of a digital journey, they're actually quite keen on adding in some grit into that journey to make it not as straightforward as it could be. So at the moment, they're minded to not allow information from dashboards to be passed directly to advisors or other third parties who can then activate transactions on their behalf. Obviously, the information belongs to the individual. We want the individuals to use this information, but we also want them to be aware of what it is that they're doing. So as well as the numbers on pensions dashboards, some of the design standards that we're putting in place and the regulations which FCA are putting in place will talk about what the wording needs to be that's accompanying those, not just on what's on the screen, but also on what's downloaded. So any warnings also accompany the numbers when they're taken elsewhere. To give people every opportunity to be aware of what they're doing and to have to take a second step and to do something else in order to do some of that aggregation or money withdrawal that you are talking about. I don't think there's a way to make it foolproof. I think there are already aspects of the market which means that this is happening. I think there are already aggregators that exist. So I think what we're trying to do is to give people as much information and as much context around that information as well to help them to make an informed decision. But it's not going to be straightforward. One of the advantages we do have at the Money and Pension Service, for example, and the Money Helper dashboard that is being provided, which has to be provided as part of the primary legislation around pensions dashboards, is also the link to the wraparound to the Money Helper guidance service, which can help people answer some of those questions about should I be consolidating or not. But we need to make sure that those services are available to everybody who uses every dashboard to make sure that people end up making a positive choice and getting the right outcome rather than ending up doing something which may not be in their best interests.
Yep, no, that's good. I mean, and as an advisor, we're going to sort of find it, fairly infuriating if, people come to us and say, look, we've got this information from the dashboard, and we want to consolidate and put it all into a SIP. And then we say, well, okay, well, we've got to start again and fill in letters of authority and go and get the information. Yeah. So hopefully, sometime down the line, you will be able to integrate with advisors.
Yeah, and I think we are certainly looking at that kind of delegated authority. So if an individual gives that authority to an advisor to act on their behalf to collect the information, then that's something which I think might not be in the very initial case, but it's certainly something that we're looking at developing as we go through.
Yeah, that would work. That would work. Good. Yeah. Okay, well, thanks very much.
No problem.
Okay, I've got a great comment in chat which you can read from Alan Chaplin. I think it's a comment rather than a question, so I'll leave it there, Alan, unless you want to speak. Porrick has got his hand up. Is that legacy at Porrick, or is that a new question?
No, it's a new question based on what Chris was just saying. Chris, does that mean then that MAPS is going to overhaul its its advice, particularly around consolidation, because I raised an issue in MAPS last year, which an IFA was trying to raise with them about misleading or an omission from a document, which could lead to people making dangerous moves with their consolidating out of the UK. At first, MAPS was dismissive to the IFA and myself. He kept plugging away. I kept banging on about it. And eventually, despite the fact they had no intention of reviewing the document, it was reviewed, but it wasn't then publicised to anybody. So I publicised it through Pensions Expert. So does that mean MAPS is going to make sure that their advice is, or their guidance is, fit for purpose? And also, will you make sure that the guidance is across the board is compatible, so we don't have the left hand not knowing what the right hand's doing?
Yeah, so thanks for that, Padraig. The initial question is slightly out of my ambit, I think, in responsibility for the guidance provided by the whole of the Money and Pension Service. But my understanding and my expectation would be that it's continually under review, and there will be an opportunity to make sure that when the Money Helper service launches alongside the pensions dashboard that they're constructing at the moment, it will be, I think, as up to date and reliable as it should be. I think in doing that, I think the guidance piece across the whole industry is a more tricky one. Again, one of the really interesting parts, if I can use interesting in this context, of the Pensions Dashboards programme is that we are responsible for constructing the infrastructure, and we're responsible for the standards. There are lots of other things which are needed to make dashboards work as well as they can do. Some of which, for example, is the policy, which is set by the department, the regulations and the legislation, which is set by the department, the enforcement, which is set by the FCA and the TPR, the regulation of dashboards, which is done by the FCA, the work done by the industry in order to make sure it connects. Unfortunately, I don't have direct control over any of those, but we can try and influence as much as we can. And so part of the role of the programme is in almost like trying to conduct the orchestra around pensions dashboard. So we will do all we can to make sure that all the information and all the services around pensions dashboards are as joined up and as positive as they can be. But I would just point out that it's a tricky job to get all of those things aligned straight away. And this is the first iteration of dashboards. They will evolve over time as we go through. And these are the types of issues that I think we'll want to pick up as we go to make sure that that dashboards do evolve into something which are even more useful for the people using them as we go forward.
That's good news, and we'll get there eventually, is a phrase which I've been using about the dashboards for the last 10 years. Brilliant. We have the famous ferret on the line, and he's got his hand up. So over to you, Gareth. I know you've had questions in chat. Please expand.
Thanks, Henry. Yeah, it's back to the MAPS question again. One of the real issues around people with particularly low pensions savings is the interaction with means-tested benefits, and particularly complexities around things to do with untaken pension savings. Now, we do a lot of work and provide systems to do those kind of calculations. And it's the kind of thing that MAPS, particularly through PensionWise, ought to be doing as well. But PensionWise has never been allowed to actually talk about numbers with people. It's never been allowed to actually look at their personal details, which is what is crucial. So if we're starting to pass data from the dashboard across, will they then be able to start talking about individualized numbers?
Again, brilliant question, and a really good, another good example of where kind of the provision of dashboards is shining a light on issues that exist in other aspects and other areas. I think, if my memory serves me correctly, the responsibility for PensionWise was with the Treasury, is now passed over to DWP. So that would be a question that DWP would need to answer to decide what the remit of PensionWise is, and what they can say, how far they can go, and how they can use those numbers coming through. So again, that's something that I will pass on into that particular area, that particular team. But as we go through the process, the focus, understandably, at the moment is on connection, but the focus will move on to the interaction with individuals and what the information is they get and how they can use it. And I think that's when a number of these questions will be reconsidered, I think, to make sure that the dashboards are able to be used to the best of their, that they can be utilised to get the best from them. I think that's something we want to make sure. If you've got dashboards, we want them to work in the best way they possibly can.
We really should get the new chap from the DPPF who's taken on maps on this call and ask him some of these questions directly. Thanks very much. Gareth, you had another question.
No, I was just going to add on to that. I mean, if the dashboard isn't able to pass that data, or people aren't able to pass the data easily with their permission to third parties, then that kind of potential value seems to disappear.
And I would really urge you, I think, Gareth, that the FCA are kind of have a short consultation period out at the moment around those regulations, but for what a qualifying pensions dashboard service can and can't do. And I think one of the areas for discussion is about what people can do with their information and how they can pass that on. So if there are ideas or concerns that you have in that space, I would urge you to respond to that consultation and get that information over to the FCA.
Thanks, I didn't know about that.
You do now. We'll get the FCA link up on chat, I'm sure. Alan had your hand up just for a second. Did you have something you wanted to say, or that's Chaplin? Okay, I'll move on. Peter Cameron Brown, very interesting question about behaviour. Do you want to ask the question directly, Peter, or do you want me to ask it for you?
You can ask it for me, thank you, Henry.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the gist of it is that pots and pensions are very different things, but they're very confusing to people. How much work has been done by MAPS and by yourselves on trying to get people to understand the difference between a pension pot and a pension?
Yep, so a reasonable amount so far, and more will continue. So we've been doing user testing since the start of the programme, using dummy data with individuals to show them kind of the sorts of information that might be shown on a pensions dashboard, so they can understand, or we can find from them what they do understand and what they don't understand as they go through. So as part of the data standards that we're asking to be provided, and part of the design standards for what's shown, each pension pot will also be shown as a pension income. For DB pensions, we're not asking for a capitalised value or a lump sum value or a transfer value, for example. We're just asking for the income stream. So ideally, what people will be able to take away will be the different income streams that their different pensions will generate. They're not all going to be entirely comparable because they will start at different ages, have different indexations, and that's all the context which will need to be provided as part of what I was talking about the wording on dashboards as well as just the numbers. But we will continue to test that. And so one of the things that we have got planned for the rest of this year, which we can really pick up once we start to get the voluntary participants connecting into the ecosystem, and then to start to use real individuals with real data, is to redo and update a lot of that testing around what people understand on dashboards, what they can see, what they take away, what they then go on and would like to do next. And we can make sure through those processes that we're getting a dashboard which not only shows people the information, but in a format which they can understand, and then can work out what they can do next, and just as importantly, work out what they shouldn't be doing next as well. All of those are really relevant points.
Thank you very much. I hope I properly asked your question, Peter. That was a quite encouraging answer, actually. It's not going to be a wealth management tool, it's going to be a pension tool. Excellent. So any more questions at this stage, or can we allow Chris to move on?
Shall we move on?
Yeah, I'm just trying to wonder how much more I'll get through, but whether we need to or not, I know. But if I'll just try and run through them really quickly, might have covered a lot of the stuff, but actually questions and answers are just as interesting to me, hopefully to you as well. So this is just a quick update alongside the connection guidance that's recently been published. We're also going to be updating and publishing new versions of the standards and the guidance which run alongside these. These are really important because these help those who are building connections and those who are providing data to understand exactly how they need to connect and exactly what they need to do in doing it. These are kind of the way of fleshing out the regulations as such. So the data standards will be coming out very shortly. We're already working on the code of connection and the technical data standards with the voluntary participants as well. So they will be published again shortly after the data standards, and then we'll be looking at reporting standards beyond those. All of those will be published later this year. And all in place long before the guidance starts back in, or the staging timeline starts back in April next year. They are written by PDP on behalf of the Money and Pension Service, but they are ultimately owned and the responsibility of the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, who will sign the final version of the standards. And we'd expect that to happen again around the time that the staging timetable kicks in as we go forward. If we can move on quickly from there, I will just say a little bit about what I've just been mentioning with the user testing, because one of the important things we're doing is setting up a user testing and planning group, which is in process at the moment. We're just going through trying to work out how exactly that would best work in order to feed the expertise from the industry back into the programme. This is about testing for the process of the ecosystem itself. It's around testing things like the identity service. We'll also be testing dashboards themselves, and we're expecting the industry and those, especially those who are interested in providing pensions dashboards, to be doing a lot of user research themselves. This is a way of trying to help coordinate and learn from those right the way across the industry as we're going forward. The one thing I'd bring out there, I think that is really important, is about the informing the Secretary of State's decision-making for the dashboards available point. I mentioned that one of the criteria is coverage and having enough pensions available to be found, that people have a good chance of finding the vast majority of their pensions when they go onto a dashboard. Also, though, we need pensions dashboards to be a good consumer experience. We need people to understand what they're seeing. We need people to be, I was going to say pleased, I mean at least satisfied with what they're seeing, to be able to do the right thing when they have that information, and they need to feel safe and secure in that operation. So there are a number of different features about the way the ecosystem is working and about the way that people understand the information they're being shown that are also important, that will feed into that decision-making process for when the Secretary of State decides that dashboards are ready to be made available to the public. In regulations, the Secretary of State makes that decision and has to give 6 months notice of when that will be. So when that notice is made will depend on how well the connection process is going, how many schemes have connected in line with the guidance, and how well the testing is going and how much data can be found, how accurate it is, how securely it's being presented. All of those things we will only really start to learn once we get real people connected to dashboards and are able to do real testing with them. So that's why user testing is so important and why it's a big focus for the second part of this year going forward. If there's no questions on that, we can move on to the next slide. So this is really an information slide. So I mentioned that we're working with voluntary participants. These are the organisations who I think actually have given up a lot of time and effort in order to help us with the development of the system and where we've got to so far. So we're very grateful for all of their support. But these are the voluntary participants that will be connecting later this year in advance of the staging timeline coming into operation. As you can see, a lot of them are in that ISP, integrated service provider bracket, and so it's really important that they understand and are connected how the system works, because they'll be managing connections on behalf of the vast majority of the industry going forward. So if you have them in place before onboarding starts in earnest with the guidance, then we'll have done a lot of work, I think, towards making sure that that onboarding process can run smoothly going forward. I'm very happy to share these slides afterwards as well with anyone who's looking for them. So we can make sure that they're all provided afterwards.
I guess there's quite a lot of clipping going on at this particular slide, so look forward to that. There's a question coming from Bryn. So Bryn, do you want to ask your question?
Well, it sort of speaks for itself, I hope, but I will confess, I never consolidated my pensions. I've got various pensions and they're all in payment. and there's this sort of explicit assumption currently that it's a good idea for people to put all their pensions together. But if the dashboard is good enough, why would there be any pressure for people to do that?
It's a great question.
It's a good question, and it's one that, let me see if I can answer it. I mean, from my perspective, I think you're right. There isn't necessarily a need for consolidation. I think in some cases, consolidation at an individual level is a good thing. In some circumstances, it wouldn't be a good thing. I think where consolidation tends to be happening is more in the DC space, but we still have a large legacy and still some existing, especially in the public sector, DB schemes as well. And therefore, combining DB and DC is a much more difficult decision and advice process, I'd imagine, than just looking at DC. Even consolidating within DC, there are certain questions you need to look at. And I think that's why the FCA in particular is very keen around the regulations that will be in place around how easy it is for people to take that consolidation step, and in trying to set out pathways which at least send people through guidance and advice before they take that step. So I think there is, I think in the marketplace, there's a push for consolidation. I think within the government, there's a push for consolidation at the scheme level, I think, and maybe at the small pot level as well. But I'm not sure that there's necessarily the same appetite, although I have to admit that this is not my area of expertise within government. I'm just working on pensions dashboards, but I think there's a difference between the consolidation at those larger levels between individual level consolidation going forward. So I think it's a very valid question. If you have a good dashboard and you can see the value of your different pensions and the relative advantages, eventually when we get costs and charges, for example, as part of that, then do you need consolidation as part of that as well? That might be an individual question rather than something which is policy led.
I'm happy to say there are lots more questions. Do you want to whiz through the rest of your slides and take them at the end, or do you want to take them now?
And let's whiz through. I'll do 10 seconds a slide just so I can say I've been through them, and just so you can then look at them afterwards, because I've talked about a lot of this. This is how we're collaborating with the industry.
7, 8.
The important one I was going to mention there was the industry advisory group, which we've just expanded from 10 to 18 people. And so we're looking forward to working with them going forward as well. But we will be doing a lot of public work and very happy to involve all of you in these conversations going forward. So if you can move on to the next slide, which I think we could possibly almost skip over because I think it's just going to reiterate the different groups that we're currently working with, which I'm sure many of you are part of. But again, just to reiterate how closely we want to work with the industry, we will continue to have these conversations to make sure that what we are putting in place is feasible and consistent with what can actually be delivered. So very happy to skip over this one as well. And a little bit, this is generally, I think most people will know this already as well, about what the schemes can be doing for getting ready. Now you know what your connection date is. The key things: get your data ready, know how you're going to match the data, and make sure that the data is clean enough for doing that. Keep in touch with us and the regulators so you know what's going to happen, and make sure that dashboards are a subject for discussion for every board meeting you've got between now and the time you connect, and possibly thereafter as well. If you haven't decided how you're going to connect, whether you're going to build a connection or use an ISP, or which ISP you're going to use, I would recommend doing that as soon as possible, because the marketplace is going to be busy, and you want to make sure that the ISP you want to go with can fit you in order to go at the time that you want to, in order to meet your guidance deadline. So keep doing all of that. So again, very quick whistle stop tour. Happy to move on.
Move on, please.
That's it. And then this is the final slide. Stay in touch. So lots and lots of questions. And I'm very aware that I've done all the talking and haven't allowed Duncan to come in at all. So I don't know if there's anything that Duncan wants to add.
No, that's great. I was just saving my voice. You've done an excellent job of answering all the kind of more technical ones. I think, look, from my perspective, I've been in the kind of the data kind of customer tracing, member tracing world for kind of 25 years. It's great to see that so much thought is going into how we make it possible to connect as many people as possible. There's your penultimate slide there, Chris. I think for me, the key one is data preparedness. It would be with the hat that I typically wear. It is vitally important, and it's something that's been massively underinvested in by the industry, I think, over the last 2 or 3 decades, really. So I suspect there's probably a long way to go for schemes to get ready in that regard, to make it as easy as possible for people to find as many of their pots as possible. But yeah, I think you've covered everything that I would have wanted to kind of chime in on. So job well done.
Thank you.
There are still questions, which things that you haven't covered.
Yeah, always questions.
And it's good to see them. Brian Baines, the man with the money box. Are you coming back to your?
Right. Thank you. Just a quick one from me. I saw obviously the guidelines coming out last week, and the language around it is kind of heavily couched and caveated in terms of we're recommending firms obviously connect by the various deadlines, which we kind of fully intend to do. And you don't want everybody connecting at the last minute, obviously. I'm just wondering what risks there are to firms of potentially going after the guidelines and before the 31st of October 2026. As I say, it will just help for internal conversations here, because I know I'll be asked that question.
Yeah, so alongside the timeline on the DDPP website, there's quite a lot about kind of what having regard to the guidance means. So there is a specific legal meaning of having regard, and it means that you need to have considered the guidance before taking any financial decisions. For example, you need to demonstrate that you've got the right governance processes in place. And I think ultimately the real risk that that firms are taking if they decide to not stage in line with the guidance is the risk that they won't be able to then stage before October 2026. And if they don't stage before the 31st of October 2026, they are then in regulatory breach. And there are significant powers for both regulators to be able to fine schemes and enforce at that point. So we're aware that there are lots of schemes. There are about 3,000 schemes we think will need to comply between now and October 2026. That's quite a lot. A lot of them will be going through a relatively small number of integrated service providers. That's why I suggested that you want to get hold and get planned in with yours relatively soon. There's no guarantee if you leave it late that they will be able to fit you in when you need to do it. And if anything arises in the marketplace, which means you cannot connect by October 2026, if you've started late, or if you've deliberately decided, even you can demonstrate the rationale for going late, you don't meet that deadline, it's going to be much harder, I think, to convince regulators that you were doing everything that you possibly could to meet the regulations. So there is, I think, could be much more help available for those who are staging in time with the guidance from both ourselves and from the regulators to help them through that journey. Most of the big organisations we've been speaking to have suggested that they would expect their members to be connecting in time with at the same stage. Most of the big schemes have said that they will be connecting at the time that they're being expected to. One or two have also said that they think others might not, but no one has actually admitted to doing it themselves. So we'll see what happens. But we'll be working hard between now and April to give all the support and help that we can to ensure that schemes are ready and have everything they need to be able to meet that guidance, because it's really important, as I mentioned, for a number of reasons, that we get that orderly queue almost of people connecting over time to make sure that it runs as smoothly as possible.
There are a number of questions remaining, but I'm going to ask Judy Codling if she may, just to put her points, because I think you speak on behalf of quite a lot of schemes, don't you, Julie, in terms of your position at Zedra, yeah?
Yeah, so yeah, we have about 60 different clients, and mostly they are actually outsourced pensions administration, so they won't be looking for their own ISP. They'll be reliant on those outsourced pensions providers, and they're in a queue for a lot of project work around data. So there's huge amounts of data work that are ongoing, and I think the point I was trying to make is that trustees shouldn't be looking as the dashboard in isolation from the other projects they're working on, because if they're looking for buyout as an end game, they'll need to do a lot of work on data, and actually they should try and then take a more holistic view of the data cleansing that they need to do, and think about all the different things they need to use it for. If they're DC, which obviously has a different connotation, there's still web access and things like that, that actually having better data will enable the trustee to improve the member service it provides by allowing them to go online. So I guess that's where I'm coming from, is just don't think about things in isolation, look at it holistically.
That's a brilliant point, Judith. It's really a really important one as well. There are so many different things happening in the industry, but a lot of them are around similar areas, and data is definitely one of those. And I'd like to see dashboards as a catalyst for improving the outcomes and the data in all of those areas. And if you can do joint working, if you know you've got a data exercise going on, then try and combine more than one thing together is definitely a way of doing that efficiently. So that's a really good point.
Will I move on to Robert? You had a question about small pots, or at least an observation about small pots, Robert.
Yeah, I think it was just in relation to the consolidation piece earlier on, Henry. So when all you're seeing, so I had a previous point, Chris, if you just clarify, are you saying that DC pots might show a fund value as well as an income amount, or is it only an income amount?
So DC pots will show both.
Okay.
DB pots will only show an income amount.
Okay, cool. And I think the point about consolidation, when people can see everything within the dashboard, what we're seeing as a provider is obviously many small pots. And at that small pot level, there's little value, I think, in just seeing a whole list of tiny amounts, and you'll still see a fair amount of consolidation there. And I'm highlighting that we recently did a pension transfer case for just £5.82. So it's about actually having a really simple process for people to consolidate alongside this ability to see everything you got in one place.
Yeah.
There was a question for Duncan. I don't know if it's a planting question, but Duncan, would you like to sort of explain a little bit more about what Gretel is doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I wasn't sure I was going to get time to. I was actually just typing an answer in there for Martin, but I'm happy to answer it in person. So Gretel is effectively a dashboard for all types of financial products. So we cover everything from child trust funds through to pensions, for a whole variety of reasons that I won't bore you all with. But we give coverage now. We've got several thousand companies that we can help people connect into at the moment. So we've got hundreds of thousands of people that are currently using our service. So it's definitely seeing a lot of take up. I think for me, the debate around consolidation is an interesting one. It's not a massive part of what we do, but we get a lot of interest from the advisor community and the wealth community wanting to kind of use the information that comes from us. One of the things that we're very careful of, in the same way, Chris, I think that you guys are, is to make sure that the handover of that information, if it's going to happen, happens in the right way with the consent of the individual. This is not a case of Gretel selling people's data so that firms can profit off it. It has to be an informed decision taken by the individual person who's done the search.
Okay, thank you. There's a question, hand up, Mr. Goddard. Very nice of you to be so polite on your own
well,
site.
I'm being very polite on my own site, I know.
Yeah.
Chris, just a couple of points. Advertising, obviously, we are industry centric on this call, I guess. What is the advertising comms plan? Because, if I go down, I live in Sevenoaks, if I go down Sevenoaks High Street, how are these people going to know that this is going to exist? Are we talking radio? Are we talking tube? Are we talking buses? Is it just, I don't know, what is the plan? That's my first question. So.
Okay, well, the plan is there will be a plan. I don't know whether it be on tubes or buses or on the radio at the moment. I think we don't want to be advertising yet, because the last thing we want is to create lots of demand that we can't supply. So we need to be much closer to the dashboard's available point before we really start to really raise the consciousness. We know that they're going to be popular, because we know with the testing we've done so far, most people really have no idea about pensions dashboards until you tell them what they are, and suddenly they're really interested. So I think there is a market out there that we will tap into as when we do it. I think it's also important that we look at dashboards as part of the wider context around planning for retirement more generally. And so I think it may well be that we're looking at kind of an engagement campaign rather than just a dashboards campaign, which dashboards are an important part. It's really a question, I think, for not just ourselves at MAPS, but also for the Department for Work and Pensions. There have been lots of discussions happening already, and they will continue, but I'm pretty sure that there will be quite a lot of advertising in order to make sure that people are aware of dashboards at the right time. And I think for us at the moment, it's at the right time that's the most important part.
Yeah. Okay. And my second quick question is, will you be adopting something like Trustpilot to get feedback from users? Not necessarily because I'm sure you're going to be 5-star, Chris, on Trustpilot, but more importantly, feedback to help build and create, because we all know the site's not going to be 100% right on day one, but with Trustpilot reviews, maybe that's a good start. Yes or no?
Yeah, so I think that's more of a question for the dashboard providers rather than for the ecosystem itself, because I don't think people will be able to tell the difference between what's been happening on a dashboard and what's been happening behind the scenes on a dashboard. I think there will need to be a way in which we can monitor what's going on at doing that, and customer feedback will be a really important part of that. So I don't have the answer to that at the tip of my fingers, but I think it's something that we will need to be speaking to the dashboard operators about, because if they're coming across issues, getting poor reviews, which are actually nothing to do with the dashboard, but because the ecosystem's not working properly, I'm pretty sure they'll tell us about it relatively quickly. We'll need to make sure that we get it sorted out. But there will be a lot of collaboration between ourselves and the people on the sharp end speaking to consumers as well. But that consumer protection framework that we're putting in place is going to be really important as part of that, and feedback has to be an important element.
Dashboard league tables, dashboard usage tables, dashboard performance tables, value for money from the dashboards, all to come from your helpful friends at DWP, MAPS, and indeed the Pension Dashboard Programme. Thank you very much, Chris. It's been a cracking hour. Sadly, it is now an hour, and we have to wind up. But can I ask everyone to say thanks to Chris in the usual way, and if we didn't get to your question, sorry.
Well done, Chris. Yeah,
thanks everyone.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Okay, over to you, Steve, to wrap up.
Yeah, no, just reiterate that, Chris. Fantastic presentation. If anybody wants the slides, email Henry Tapper or myself. I think, Chris, we're happy to send slides out, correct?
We are. Yeah, definitely.
They will be on my blog.
They'll be on Henry's blog this afternoon or tomorrow. The video of today will be online on Pension Playpen this afternoon. So yeah, if anybody missed it, then please log in and look at the media tab on the Pension Playpen site, which is great. So Chris, thank you very much indeed. Duncan, thanks for your input as well. I really appreciate that. And I hope everybody enjoyed the session. I think there'll probably be another session at some point, Chris, again, once all these issues become clearer, but really appreciate your support and your input today. Next week, we're going to be in conversation with an industry guru. Can't tell you who it is yet because it's a big surprise. But hopefully you can join next week's session, which will be on the 16th of April. And as usual, we pray for peace in the East and peace in the Middle East. So Henry, I can't believe, after possibly 3 years of this, we're still saying these things, but we want peace in the world if possible. So enjoy the rest of your day, enjoy the rest of your week, and really appreciate everybody's input and time today. Hope you enjoyed the session, and please contact Henry or I if you want a copy of the slides.
Thank you.
And be safe. Yeah. Okay. Cheers, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, Chris. Thanks a lot. Cheers, Duncan. Thanks.